Alright, let's talk about some hand tools. These are the essentials that I recommend everyone start off with. Screwdrivers. Rather than buy a whole set of varying sizes of Phillips and flatheads, honestly I just recommend these three. So this one is referred to as a 6-in-1 screwdriver. The reason being, it has 6 different functions. You take the shaft out, you take the 2 bits out, and as you can see you have a large and a small Phillips. Phillips are the ones that make a plus when you look at it head on. And you also have a large and a small flathead. Flathead's a bit more self-explanatory. It's flat. So that's 4. The other 2, they're somewhat hidden, but you have nut drivers. These are surprisingly handy. You've got a 1/4 inch and 5/16. And those happen to show up all over the place. So the way you would use that, you would take the bit out, and then you can place this over the head of a nut and turn it as if you were using a screwdriver. It's surprisingly useful. Now these, although they're cheap and they seem like something that's not very professional, I've had great luck with them. I've had them outlast Craftsman screwdrivers, which they're warranted for life. They're supposed to be the cream of the crop, and they're great. But honestly, these are worth their weight in gold. So definitely get these. The only caveat is some of them have the large bits on one of the bits and small bits on the other. Others have the 2 Phillips bits on one, the 2 flatheads on the other. It doesn't make a difference. It just kind of guarantees that you'll end up changing it around 7 or 8 times before you figure out where the right bit is. It's kind of like a USB drive. Every time I plug in a flash drive, it's the 3rd try that I get it right. I don't know if that's just me or if... Never mind. In addition to the 6-in-1 screwdriver, I'd recommend getting a couple of these small screwdrivers. 1 Phillips, again, and 1 flathead. They come in super handy. They do small screws, obviously, that the larger screwdriver will not handle. These particular ones, they are Cobalt. That's the Lowe's brand. Husky is the Home Depot brand. I've had great luck with both. A bit more economical, and they hold up well. So I definitely recommend either of those. Tape measures. Also something you'll use very frequently. So these 2 particular ones, the main difference is that this is just imperial. It measures inches. This one has metric and imperial. Honestly, I love using metric, even though it actually hasn't taken off much in the States. It's a lot easier to say, 10.4 centimeters, rather than say, what's the equivalent? 4 and 1/16 inches, whatever it is. So when you're reading these, either way, it's important to know what the markers mean. Let's stick with this one because it shows both. So as I mentioned, the metric, the numbers showing there are centimeters. The individual lines between the centimeters are millimeters. So you would say 10 centimeters, 11 centimeters, so the lines between would be 12.1 centimeter, 12.2 centimeters, and so on. When you're reading in the imperial or English system, American system, whatever you want to call it, it's just as handy, but it gets confusing a lot more quickly. Let's see. I'll go over here where it's not quite as worn down. These lines are farther apart. If you count them, there's 16 of these lines between every inch. So that's 1/16 of an inch. As you can see, some of the lines are longer. The longest one denotes a 1/2 inch. The next longest is a 1/4 inch. You'll see 1/4, 1/2, 3/4, up to the next inch. The next longest in between there would be 1/8 inches, so 1/8, 2/8, 3, 4/8. Well, you wouldn't say 4/8, you'd say 1/2 inch, and so on, down to 16th. And this particular ruler, or tape measure, you can see up through the foot it has 30/2 of an inch for more precise measurements. Very handy, but again, until you just kind of memorize and get a feel for where the lines are, it's a bit cumbersome to continually count 9 and 7/16 of an inch, 7/32, whatever it's going to be. That's why I tend to stick with the metric. Whatever suits you, it's personal preference. A couple other important things to note about tape measures. Let's see, they all have the ability to lock open, like I'm showing here. This one, you have to push down on this plunger here, and it'll stay extended. This one automatically stays extended. When you press this paddle on the back, it lets itself back in. So again, just personal preference. The other important thing is the end. This throws people off a lot before they realize why it's like this. As you can see, the hook on the end, it jiggles back and forth. You might think there's something wrong or you bought a cheap tape measure, but it's designed like that and it's actually incredibly handy. The reason is if you're measuring, say you hook it over the edge. That way, the hook moves out and the measurement starts from the actual edge. Versus, let's see if I were to, we'll grab a hammer here and pretend that's a block. Now, if you push this tape measure up against the hammer, see if you'll be able to see this, you'll see it'll kind of slide in a little bit. It slides in 1/16 of an inch. That correlates to the thickness of this plate. And that makes sure you still get an accurate measurement so that the thickness of the plate doesn't add itself in to your measurement. So that wiggle, that's a good thing. That makes sure you get good measurements. One additional thing, you'll see on every tape, here we go on the back, right here it says 3 3/8 of an inch. This one says 3 inches. It has little arrows on there. That is telling you the width of the tape measure itself. That's handy if you're measuring between, well, let's set up the hammers again. Say you're measuring between two walls or boards or whatever. That way, say it comes out to 14 right there. You add in the 3, so you know it's 17 inches right there. Rather than having to try to bend it in there and figure out what that final measurement is. So that's a handy trick to know. Again, okay, bending the tape is also very convenient. This is especially good when you're measuring something vertical. So you can pull out more than you need, set this side on the ground, and then you can kind of bend this up as you're measuring up a wall or board, whatever. You'll learn to stabilize it and extend it up farther than you can reach. It's just a handy trick to be aware of. As long as we have hammers out, let's talk about these. This is my current hammer. If you want to know why I have it, you'll have to ask my 4-year-old. He picked it out for me. He actually made a great choice. I'm not sure what his selection criteria were, but I'll go over some of the features and explain why it was a good choice. So hammers come in a huge number of varieties. The ones we're going to talk about are claw hammers, named for the claw on the back. Under that group, you have 2 subsets. You have your all-purpose general hammers, and you have framing hammers or ripping hammers. Those ones are larger. They have features intended for construction guys who are going to be using all day, and they need the momentum of a heavier hammer to help drive nails so they're not just using brute force all day. So we are going to be using these slightly lighter hammers. These ones weigh anywhere between 10 and 20 ounces. This particular one weighs 16. For me, it just has a good feel. It's not too heavy. It doesn't feel like it's not going to fatigue me by having to swing this over and over. And it's heavy enough that it'll drive nails with ease. If you want something lighter, just whatever feels good to you, it's totally fine. This one's a 10 ounce. This one, it obviously is not going to carry the same momentum and drive nails as easily. But if you're smaller, if you have tiny muscles like me, this one might be a good option. Just go to the store, try them out, see what feels good. They're also obviously made of different materials. This one's metal, this one's wood. Pros and cons of each. The metal one is going to be a lot more durable. If you go to hit a nail and you miss and it hits the side of the hammer, you're not going to hurt the hammer. Wood ones, you do that enough, you can see there's some nicks in this one already. You do it enough, you're going to break the hammer. I actually got this hammer because my old wood one broke right off. It wasn't when I was nailing, but I was trying to pull a nail out and the head just snapped right off. So that's definitely a con, but one of the pros of a wood hammer is the shock absorbance. So a metal one, when you hit a nail, it'll kind of create this reverberation and shake your hand a little bit. It's not bad, and the rubber handle definitely helps to mitigate that, but it can be a little annoying. Wood ones, they will absorb the shock a little bit more. Fiberglass ones, not as common, but similar to wood, they will absorb the shock as well. Now the claws on the back, you can see this one's a bit more curved. That's more typical of these all-purpose hammers. The slightly straighter claw, you generally see that more with the framing hammers because it allows removal of larger nails more easily, whereas shorter, smaller nails are more easily removed with this one, which you would more often see in a home. Either way, they both get the job done. They both work pretty well. Alright, let's go over some different types of pliers. Needle nose pliers, sometimes also called long nose pliers. You might be familiar with these. They have long, skinny jaws on them, great for reaching into small areas, grabbing small things. This particular pair also has a set of wire cutters on the inside there, occasionally handy for cutting through wire, string, small things like that. Now just a tip, I noticed as I'm holding this, this comes naturally to me, and if you don't find yourself grabbing pliers like this, it's definitely worth trying it out until it becomes kind of second nature. You can see I've put my middle finger on the inside there, and it lets you open it and close it without readjusting your fingers. It might seem like a silly thing, but if you naturally grab it like this, there's when you loosen up, there's no really good way to open it up, and you'll find that you'll quickly want to be operating like that. These are most often called channel locks. Now, channel lock, it's kind of like Kleenex, whereas Kleenex has become the household name for facial tissue. Channel lock has become the name for what is technically called tongue and groove pliers or groove joint pliers. Although I've honestly never heard them called that. This actually is made by Channel Lock. So these are Channel locks. The way they work, you open the bottom jaw, it slides up and down on top of the top jaw, and effectively gives you 7 or 8 different pliers all in one. So if you need to grab something larger or something smaller, this will get the job done. Very convenient. Lineman pliers, some people might be surprised I'd recommend these, but I find them incredibly useful, mainly because they're just so hefty and thick. It's where you need to get a really good grip on something, and a twisting or pulling, it gives you a lot of extra torque because the jaws they're short, they're hefty, they're close together. There's no chance they're going to twist as you try to pull on whatever you're trying to pull on. For example, if you tried to grab a large, I don't know, hook or a nail or something you needed to get out that you couldn't reach with a hammer, slightly smaller, less hefty pliers, such as the needle nose, they'll actually the jaws will tend to twist against one another, whereas these ones they're just brutally strong. So I do recommend these. Again, these have wire cutters on the inside there, which is occasionally useful. The last type of pliers are diagonal pliers, also known as side cutters. You'll hear them called dikes, short for diagonal cutters. Fortunately, that term seems to be phasing out with older generations. But if you hear them referred to as that, that's why. So I call them side cutters. Most people that I come across nowadays call them side cutters. They are, just like in these two sets here, a set of wire cutters. But obviously it goes all the way to the tip and lets you reach into places and cut things. And I find myself grabbing these constantly. They're just incredibly handy, useful for a variety of different tasks. All right, next up we have crescent wrenches. Crescent is another name that's actually a brand. These technically are called adjustable wrenches. They're very aptly named as they're adjustable. So you get a couple sizes. If you're getting a couple, I'd recommend probably the 8-inch and I believe this is a 12-inch. That'll cover most of what you're going to encounter. So the way they work, as you might guess, you turn this until it's the proper size. A tip on getting the right size, rather than just snugging up on the bolt, what I often do is close it up and then kind of give the wrench a little jiggle to make sure both of the jaws are seated flatly on the nut, the bolt, whatever's you're turning. That'll make sure there's no extra play in that bottom jaw. Because as you can see, the bottom jaw wiggles. That does make it a little bit weaker, especially compared to those solid metal open-ended wrenches that have just a single size or perhaps one size on each side of the wrench. But the convenience of these far outweighs that possible negative. To overcome that, you just want to make sure you're turning so that the force is always pushing the jaw downward. Let me show you what I mean. So if you were to loosen the nut, you'd face the wrench this way. Then when you tighten it, you want to flip it over. You'll have to turn the dial the opposite direction. I always get it wrong the first try. And then you'll want to turn again this way so that, once again, the force is pushing down on that bottom jaw. It'll work the other way, but sometimes if you're really cranking on it, it'll tend to loosen up more quickly and slip and just not work quite as well. Utility knives, another very handy thing that you're going to use for a lot of projects. Whole bunch of different styles. This one I love because it's classic. Growing up, my dad had one of these, so that was the first one I bought. As much as I love it, probably wouldn't recommend getting this one, only because changing the blade is a little bit of a pain. So this particular one, you have to unscrew this. Not a big deal, but the other ones are so much easier, it just makes this feel a bit silly. So the way this one works, you have a small bracket in here. They're all built pretty similarly, although the parts don't pop out quite like this. The bracket has a little hook in there that hangs onto the blade. You'll see there are 2 notches in there. It's because each blade can be used in either direction. Once one side gets dull, you flip it over and use the other side. So in this case, this is a newer blade, but you can see it's a bit scuffed up there. So once that is completely dull, I would flip this around, snap it back in there, fit that back in there. You can see the extra spare blades right here, conveniently stored in the handle. Somewhat conveniently, since you have to unscrew it. And then tighten this back up. And most of the knives, not this one, work with the same principle. This lever, for safety reasons, you can't just push it up. You have to push down, and then that lets you slide the blade up and down. There are a few notches that it locks into, so you push down in between each notch. If you're trying to cut through something thin or score material, this is handy. Make sure you don't cut all the way through and damage whatever's beneath. Not something I use very often, but it's good to know that it's there. These knives, very similar. Again, same principle here. You can't push it without pushing down. So you push it down, you slide it up. They also have the locking different lengths in the middle there. The main difference with these is how you replace the blade. So both of these, you can see they have a little button on the tip there. The way that works, you extend it, you push the button, and the blade pops right out. Super handy. So you spin that around, you push this button, stick it back in, you kind of jiggle it to make sure it locks in there, and then you're all set. Same thing with this one, and the additional feature that both of these knives have are that the blades stored in the handle are a lot more easily accessible. You don't have to take the screw out. So this one, you press the button, you open up the bag, you've got blades slid in there. They're actually on a magnet in this one, which was handy, so that they don't slide out. This one, you've got this little pocket that slides open, and you've got your extra blades. Now when it comes to extra blades, I bought little packages over and over and over until I finally realized that I'm going to go through a lot in my lifetime, so it just made sense to buy one of these bigger packages of blades. You can hang it on the wall if you want. I just toss it on the shelf. But you slide the blade out the bottom when you need a new one, and then the dull one you slide into the top, and that prevents having to toss in the garbage. These things, as you might guess, aren't the best thing just to toss in the garbage. They're going to pop out the side, cut someone else, the garbage man. It's handy to do that. Before I got this thing, I would wrap it up in a piece of cardboard and tape it up, something like that, just to prevent any inadvertent injuries when you're throwing away something sharp. This knife is a bit different. Feels like a pocket knife. Some people just love this style. It is pretty cool. You push on the release back here to close it. This one, the only disadvantage is that it does not store extra blades in the handle. When you're changing it, takes a couple extra steps there. Actually, still easier than the one with the screw. But you just take that out, slide the new one in, and close it up. Oops. And then, as I mentioned, you can dispose of this one right in there. Very convenient. So now that you have all your tools, you're going to need something to put them in. What I'd recommend is a tool bag, actually. This is very convenient. You get this size, it'll hold a huge amount of stuff. It's a bit of a mess in there, but it's very compact. It makes you feel like a doctor when you're carrying around a little black bag. And great for portability if you have a smaller number of tools, or if you keep your essentials in there. A slightly larger option, one that I use myself, is another soft side of the bag. This one, you open it up, it just flops open, you can access all of your tools in there. It's very convenient, lots of pockets all over the place. This one, Husky, the Home Depot brand that we mentioned earlier. As far as metal toolboxes go, I do have a couple, but certainly not something you're going to want to carry around. They're heavy. Even empty, they're heavy. They're great for keeping in the basement, in the garage, keep tools in there that you don't need access frequently. Keep your common hand tools in a bag, maybe keep your other tools in a metal toolbox. Plus, they're more expensive. But whatever works for you. If you wanted, you could keep your tools in a cardboard box. If you want to look really cool, you can get one of those tool belts, keep them all in there. That's actually a great option. Everything's readily accessible. Often, on smaller jobs, I'll wear carpenter jeans. They have the hammer loop and they have a couple pockets on the side. I'll keep, you know, a knife, a screwdriver, hammer, just the essentials for whatever it is I happen to be doing. And that can pretty much replace a toolbox in some instances. It's very convenient. But again, it's whatever works for you.